Today's episode was recorded on July 13th, 2024 at the Anime Station store in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles. For more information about their locations in Greater Los Angeles and online store, please visit animestation.com. Sing for Science is supported in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one with Jack Antonoff on the science of time perception. If you've not yet done so, please give us a review and some stars on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening. This is Sing for Science Labs. I'm your host, Matt White. Each episode in this series brings together an artist and scholar to explore one topic of shared interest.
Right.
Today's topic is Japanese anime culture, and our guests are rapper Denzel Curry and UC Irvine cultural anthropologist Dr. Mimi Ito. Denzel Curry is one of today's most versatile lyrical rappers and is known for pushing boundaries by incorporating elements of trap, metal, and punk into his music. His talents outside hip-hop are no less diverse in that he is a prolific visual artist and devoted fan of Japanese anime. Some of Denzel's lyrics make reference to iconic anime series like Dragon Ball Z and Naruto. And in one interview, Denzel explained that the blending of contemporary hip-hop culture with Japanese anime is similar to how Wu-Tang Clan incorporated kung fu films into their music and aesthetic in the 1990s. Dr. Mimi Ito is a distinguished cultural anthropologist and leading voice in the field of digital media studies. Mimi's 2012 book, Fandom Unbound, Otaku Culture in a Connected World, highlights the ways in which anime culture has evolved in the digital age, influencing various aspects of entertainment, fashion, and fan communities around the world. Having been brought up in both Japan and America, Mimi is uniquely positioned to trace how anime grew from Japanese export to become the global phenomenon it has in recent decades. Hello, Denzel and Mimi. Welcome to Sing for Science.
What's up, Mimi? Nice to meet you again, because we met off screen.
We did. So as I mentioned, I heard you explain the interest in anime among you and other contemporary rappers as being similar to the relationship between Wu-Tang and kung fu films. And that really kind of made it click for me, because anime is a really foreign world to me. Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about that?
So when it comes down to, let me just start off I can't tell you about everybody's experience. I can tell you my experience when it came down to me getting into anime and me really liking anime and what caused me to like anime in the first place. So I would tell everybody, when I was growing up, we had Cartoon Network, you know what I'm saying? We had Nickelodeon, Teen Nick and all that stuff and Disney. So when I first initially got into anime, there was one thing that me and my brother used to watch together because we're close in age. We're both 2 years apart, right? And after we would leave Crestview Elementary, you know what I'm saying, we would go home, and depending on what time of the day it was, because we had two Cartoon Networks, and if you know about DirecTV back in the day, there was either two Cartoon Networks, two Nickelodeons, two Disney channels, and you probably had one BET and two MTVs, right? So we would whenever we would miss something, we would catch it on the next Cartoon Network. And what we would catch was there was a certain time of the day, preferably around 3, I think it would be around 3 o'clock, Toonami would come on. And on Toonami, they would show shows like Powerpuff Girls, which is not an anime. Let me just clarify that. Ronin Warriors, Sailor Moon, Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball Z, Dot Hack, what else they had on there that was pretty cool? Ronin Kenshin. They had all these animes that was there, and we didn't know what anime was at the time. So we would just sit there and watch Dragon Ball Z and watch the reruns of those episodes where me, my brother, my oldest brother, and my other older brother, we would just watch them all together, And we would try to emulate that in some way or some form. And then when we got older, maybe around middle school, that's when they started showing Naruto, and they started showing stuff you know what I'm saying? I would say on Adult Swim, they would show Cowboy Bebop and Bleach and all these other animes that would come on at the time. Even One Piece, and I wasn't even into One Piece at that time.
So when you say emulate, what do you mean?
What you mean?
Well, you said that's
oh,
like when
right,
you
me and my brother would
yeah,
emulate. Yeah, so we'll play fight and everything like
Okay.
that. Like me and my cousins, we'll just make up games and shit.
Yeah.
Like, and all of us will just like act like we're either Goku, Vegeta, Majin Buu, Kid Buu. You know, we'll act like whoever that they was, and then we'll try to make up our own games. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you got an imagination. So you're just like, man, I'm Naruto. Oh no, I'm Rock Lee. You know what I'm saying?
So this is like 2005.
Around
Okay.
there, 2005, 2006 type.
So what does the anime universe have that like the Marvel comic book universe doesn't?
Well, when it comes down to the anime universe, you know what I'm saying? When you see somebody die in the anime universe, they might bring them back or they might not. So people die in that. Like it's just somewhat grounded, a little bit more grounded, more than like a Marvel, like a Captain America or like,
Grounded in reality.
Yeah, because you could see people like that, and you just like, oh man, this happened. And if you look at the DC universe, people relate more to Batman than Superman. You know, and when it comes down to anime, people relate to Naruto being like an outcast, a kid, and working hard. Like same with Goku, like somebody that was outcasted and was just like working hard to get better and better and better. You know what I'm saying? And dealing with adversaries on a daily, and then knowing that you have to get better. So that's was one thing that everybody like kind of resonated when it came down to anime, as somebody like, the hero's journey, the initial hero's journey, like how Joseph Campbell was talking about.
For Star Wars and all that.
Yep.
So and Denzel said this other thing I saw in an interview, which is totally jaw-dropping for me, which is that, and feel free to amend this if you want, but I heard you say that you were more influenced by anime than any other rapper.
Yeah, that's true. Because when Akira Toriyama died, the creator of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, and Dragon Ball Super, when I started really piecing it together and started writing, my letter to him, that I put on the internet, and just because I kind of like when he died, it shocked the whole community of people that are really into anime, right? So when I was writing it, as I was writing it, I was figuring out, man, this guy influenced me more than any other like any musician could influence me, because this was the first thing that I was into before I was even into music. This would cause me to want to be an artist in the first place. Being able to draw and do stuff like that.
Yeah. So does that count? And so Mimi, through the lens of a social scientist, someone who studies how culture evolves and transmits from one place to another, what do you make of Denzel's relationship to anime?
I love the story. I mean, I feel like Denzel told it better than I can explain, what I've observed as a social scientist. I mean, I just like to listen to people's stories, and I'm, as a cultural anthropologist, my job is just to be nosy, ask people a lot of questions about their experience of culture, and it's always surprising, and it's more interesting. I mean, cultural anthropologists can study your own culture, but a lot of us are curious about people with different experiences and backgrounds, or what I do is looking at the sort of sampling and remix between culture, which I think is exactly what you described. And I think is one of the things that is uniquely powerful about anime. And I am not knowledgeable about hip hop, but on the outside, it looks like there's some sort of resonance, right, between the kind of sampling and the fact that everyday people express themselves through the culture. It's not just for the commercial sector. And so it's a very creative, generative space for people. And then the work I did that you described, it was mind-blowing to me that, these sort of, people call Japan a cultural Galapagos, because there's so much happening in Japan. And then you don't realize that those stories and characters can be meaningful for people outside of our little island. And that's why I did that research, because I was just really interested in experiences like Denzel just described, because when I was doing my research, I was just wrapping up kind of around when the era that you were talking, where we were still getting most of our anime through fan distribution and subtitling and BitTorrent, and even
Yeah, I
before that,
remember
like
that.
VHS, and
Yep.
people would have to go to cons to see the latest anime. And then when Cartoon Toonami and, finally it started showing up on cable, kids had access to it. Before that, kids didn't have access to it, right? It was
Right.
like
You had to
college
really
kids.
find it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's like so powerful to just hear how the stories, because in the US at the time, I think cartoons were much simpler, right? There was like a good guy and a bad guy and sidekick, and it wasn't like this like deep trauma and angst and like coming of age stories and like hundreds of characters, like the complexity of anime. I think a lot of US kid-oriented media, they kind of simplify it a little bit more, whereas anime, it's just like all out there.
Yeah, it's like pretty much pushed because like it's not like when you look at like a DC or Marvel, you only can relate to one character in it, right? So when it comes down to of course you will want to identify with the main character, good triumphs over evil. But when I got introduced to anime, you see people that you think are clearly evil, but they have like a general purpose of why they're doing it, and then you look at it like, oh snap, like I would never seen it like that. Because there's an episode like in Naruto where Pain pretty much destroys Naruto's whole village, and Naruto had to fight him. And pretty much he asked Naruto, what are your goals and after this? And he was like, I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to bring peace to the ninja world. He was like, you killed my friends, you killed my master, and you destroyed my village. He was like, okay, that's cool and all, Naruto, but what about my friends, my family, and my village?
Right.
Yo, people did that to me.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I came over here to do this to you. War ain't gonna hate ain't gonna stop hate.
Yeah.
So when I seen that, it was like everybody, and then I seen a comment, there was like everybody's a hero till the villain starts making sense. So a lot of the times, like when you watch anime, some of the villains make a lot of sense. Even in One Punch Man, this guy named Garu, he portrays himself as a monster, but secretly you feel like he's a hero because he has like a moral code. Like certain villains in certain animes have a moral code. There's like a few that don't. Like if you watch One Piece, Doflamingo does not have a moral code. Like when you watch
Like he's neither good nor bad.
no, he's evil.
He's bad.
Yeah.
He's just bad.
Yeah.
He's just Black Air Force energy.
Yeah.
You look at somebody like Akuma. If Akuma from Street Fighter, you could deem him as evil because like killed his master, tried to kill his brother. But if he doesn't see you as a threat, he won't try you at all. And he only wants the strongest people. And you could resonate that either on a hero or a villain's perspective. Because if you want to get better at your craft, in order to be the best, you gotta take out the best. You ever heard that term?
I don't think so, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so like in order to be the best, you have to beat the best. And I see that with not only just anime heroes, you see them with anime villains as well.
And so which characters did you find yourself identifying most with?
I would say like everybody has an attribute that I like.
Yeah.
Definitely, like when you look at Naruto, you see somebody like Rock Lee and you see somebody like Naruto, and hard work pays off. And then you see somebody like Sasuke, who's like mad talented, come from a talented family, but but his whole thing was like revenge,
Okay.
But and then you have like just everybody who that you could look at as like you like a whatever character, and they come back and they surprise you. I think who is like that. I remember watching Dragon Ball Z, and everybody pretty much shits on Krillin, but when you rewatch the whole Dragon Ball Z, Krillin was in the paint with Goku 100% of the time. Like even getting killed in the process, he was in the paint with him the whole time. Regardless, he knew he was gonna lose. He knew he was gonna die at some point, but he was in the paint.
He's loyal.
Yeah. And then you see somebody like Gohan, where his journey and character development was from this kid that was like weak and like crying all the time, you know what I'm saying, living up to his father's expectations, and eventually ended up surpassing him when he killed Cell.
So are these the kind of would this be the kind of answer that you're looking for when you're doing research as a cultural anthropologist? Would these be the questions you're asking? Like, how, which ones do you identify with and why? And
Well, so I feel like Denzel has so much more depth of knowledge about anime. I look at kind of I look for the patterns of like how does like the underlying reasons why it works for people or resonates or attracts certain kinds of people or engages people in certain kinds of creative work or behavior. So, an example is because like what Denzel was just talking about, that the characters are really complex and they're a little bit different from Western narratives of good and evil. And there's a little bit of like a countercultural vibe because it challenges people's conceptions of like what the mainstream is or what the hero looks like. So it tends, like the one pattern, for example, that I've seen is that it tends to attract young people who are a little bit countercultural or not resistant to the mainstream in some way. So that's an example of a pattern. It's not usually like the kind of mainstream Boy Scout type kids who are like really into anime. It's the kids who are a little bit like on the margins or resistant or critical in some ways, but maybe not like the traditional activist critical, but like we see things differently. Like we have a little different view. We want a different viewpoint. And it's more complicated than just like a simple, like, this is the model of success or this is, what the hero should look like. So that's an example of like a pattern that I see in anime fandom in the US. Does that, I don't know, does that resonate? Or
it does resonate.
You gotta tell me if I got it wrong.
No, you got it. I mean, majority of the people that like anime, like, earlier, you can't really say it like that. Now you see it everywhere. Like, everybody's admitting, like, they like Dragon Ball Z or they like Cowboy Bebop or they like whatever the case may be. And then, but when I was growing up, if you like that stuff, you was already deemed the outcast.
you were a nerd?
You were a nerd. Like, you were just like, I don't like, just like, yo, you watch that? Oh, I ain't watching that shit. Like, you weird for watching that.
Yeah.
So people would judge you before they even watched it for real, And now you get nowadays, everybody using like Goku references, Vegeta references, like, you know what I'm saying? Even the most hood person would use a Dragon Ball Z reference. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So how did it get so widespread in hip hop?
Oh, the way it got widespread in hip hop, the same way, do media. Like, you know what I'm saying? You have somebody that's going to come in and break that mold for people and then get everybody like into it. You know what I'm saying? You got Thundercat, who was just talking about. He did a song called Dragon Ball Do-Rag. You got XXXTentacion, who was like, like Sasuke, bringing it in. And then you got people like me that's making Broly references, and you got to really watch Dragon Ball Z to know who Broly is.
Right.
And everybody's just like, wow, like, I didn't even know it. Even people like Rob Banks, who talks about Berserk all the time, and he even named one of his albums Femto. So it takes like people that have a certain aesthetic and like look somewhat cool and tell you like what is cool, and it's the determining factor of it. Like, everybody grew up watching Kung Fu films, but nobody thought to put it together like how Wu-Tang did.
Yeah, right.
They made it cool for the mainstream to like Kung Fu films.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they was putting it in the music, but they was blending it with real life and comparing it to what was happening in real life. And the whole thing about that was, it was just like two sides of Staten Island that didn't mess with each other, but and RZA looked at it like the Shaolin and the Wu-Tang and putting it together. So that's how they see it as themselves,
So when you're saying that you and your brother would kind of emulate what you were watching, is that similar?
I mean, yeah, it's like kind of similar. So when it came down to that, my brother would I remember my brother Mook, he was working on a tape back when we was kids called Saying Soldier Mook back in the day. And me, I remember we made a song called Dark Tournament, We made a song called Dark Tournament, and we used the beat by Yu Yu Hakusho, and it was made by DJ Killer C, and we was making several references in there. It was like Killer 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 Hit List or the Death Note autograph by Justin Bieber, The Future like H.R. Giga, like Left Hollow like Ichigo, Grim Reapers and Soul Eaters. So we was hella into anime. We just had to blend it in and make it like blend it with the lyricism.
I also heard you talk about playing Manhunt.
Oh man, we gonna talk about that right now?
I'm curious. So like, Because it just seems like there's some amount of like fantasy and also role playing, but also some level of violence in it too.
Nah, there's no violence in Manhunt.
There's the threat of violence though. You talked about that guy on the roof.
Oh no, that was there's a little hint of danger.
Yeah.
Little hint of danger. I was on the roof and I jumped off, and my boy Chris, is my boy Jeremy's little brother. He a guy came outside and he was like, "Was that you on my roof?" And he had a knife out. He was like, "No, that wasn't me." But Buddy let him go. So it was just like, man, just a little hint of danger.
So what is Manhunt?
Manhunt, it was like, I had to explain it. It was like how to go seek with no base, and it was 2 teams.
Yeah.
So you got one team that hide and one team that seek. And basically, like, we was hiding everywhere where we could find, like in the car, behind a big ass generator, in the trees. We had to find any place to hide. See, I would never go in the trees because it was just like I got crazy arachnophobia, so I ain't.
Yeah, in Florida too.
Yeah, I'm good off spiders. Fuck that. You know. So with Manhunt, it was just like, all right, cool. So if you get caught, you got to help find your other teammates,
right?
And then they call that double agent.
So then it just gets down to last man standing.
Yeah, it really gets down to last man standing. And the person that was winning majority of the manhunts was this kid named Mason on my block. Mm-hmm. Like he's staying on island. He's staying in the islands now, but like he was the one who was like winning most of the time because we couldn't find this man. Then he'll just pop out of nowhere like, "Hey, what's up, man?" We used to think of like just ways of like not getting caught to a point where it got to a point where we was taking our shirts off and hanging them up places and like like a dummy, like hanging them up places. So if somebody thought they got caught, they'll just grab a shirt. It was it was all types of stuff. We was hiding on the floor, all types of stuff because it's pitch black dark.
Yeah, right.
So you gotta find people and everything. And then it gets really hectic when it's like you and your homie and like both of y'all didn't get caught. And then you see one of your teammates running and then 3 people come out of nowhere chasing them. And then they see all 3 of y'all like, "Get them!" And then they all separate and you just gotta run for your life.
So is there any connection between that and just like the kind of role playing you're doing? Mimicking anime at all?
Nah.
Completely separate.
Completely separate. That was just a childhood game.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing where it comes out, if it doesn't come out with the art, like, you know, if it doesn't come out with visual art, it comes out in martial arts. Like, because everybody who does martial arts has a lot of anime references on who they want to be like in anime. So, well,
but the thing that keeps coming up is this idea of the fan community, right? And so and that is what really contributed to its spread. So can you talk a little bit about that, Mimi, just about and how you looked at that?
I mean, I think this happens in like other fandoms as well. Like there's it's really fun to get into all the specific references and like exchange knowledge. And it's a very there's the professionals, but then at the fan level, there's so much knowledge and creativity happening too. Yeah. But I think what makes maybe sci-fi here, but anime even more so, something that encourages that is it's like a language, right? So once you know, you see all the characters here,
I can name you all
Naruto, One Piece, it's like a language, and that's where. Again, as a very outside observer of hip hop, it's like the creativity is expressed through these really complicated cultural references, and you got to know what's behind them to really understand your poetry. And there's sort of a depth to that. It's not just like the one character or the one word. There's all of this meaning behind it. And then if you're in the know, it's super fun because you can understand all the references. But it takes effort and investment to get into that. And there's something. And especially with anime, because there's so much. I mean, there's some series like Dragon Ball or Naruto or One Piece that a lot of people have seen, so it's kind of the common vocabulary. But there's so much more. So the depth of nerdiness and the depth, the number of niches, is so profound compared to even U.S. sci-fi or comic. It's I think that this is a stat from a little while ago, but. And what makes it overseas as anime or manga is just a fraction of it. So in Japan, roughly the amount of print manga that's produced each week is about the equivalent of what the US comic market produces in a year.
Whoa.
So the sheer volume of content, so that just encourages like this kind of nerdy specialized behavior. But it's super fun if you understand like when like Denzel references a particular character, it's like if you've watched that whole series and you've geeked out on it, there's so much meaning and it's a vocabulary. And I think like my generation, we had less of that. But I think, you know, by your generation, there's just so much content and it becomes like, I feel like I'm also a learning scientist, so I try to lift up like how important and creative and smart these practices are. Like, this is how kids learn to express themselves and to care about knowledge as part of a community. And it's just a really powerful environment for kids to have the motivation to get good at something and learn stuff.
Right. And even then, like when you look at animes, they teach you about like friendship and everything, and like what being a true friend is, like coming to your aid. Because there was people in Naruto, like when you watch the show, that did not like Naruto in the very beginning. They thought he was dumb. They thought it was stupid. So it's just like him proving everybody wrong. So everybody has like something that they could relate to. And then like eventually when they had to get Sasuke back, all his people that didn't like him ended up becoming his friends. And then no one's like, hey, yo, we all in this together. We got to go do something. So it teaches you about friendship. So does One Piece. You know what I'm saying? And you have your core group of friends, or like you building a crew, or like just having those people that got your back no matter what, you know? And it just shows like, just like, you know, it just teaches you a lot about like life in the most subtle way it can. You know?
Were you aware of that at the time?
Nah, I just thought the fights was lit. Like, it's like, I just thought the fights was super hard because, you know, I come from a like, I have a fighting background. So does my oldest brother, you know. One of my older brothers, actually, he was a backyard fighter and stuff like that. So watching like backyard fights back then, that was just like watching real life Dragon Ball Z tournaments to me. That's why I'm a big fan of UFC, One Championship and all that stuff. And, you know, and train in like Muay Thai and everything. Because like anime had a big influence on that. If it wasn't for Dragon Ball Z, I probably wouldn't even be spin kicking people and shit, you know.
So and we were talking about Japan being this like isolated experience. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Denzel, is like when you first, so at this point, I know you've probably been to Thailand for fighting and probably performed in Japan, yeah?
Yeah.
So when you first got there, because when I first went there as a musician, I was like, I've landed on another planet, you know? But I wonder, just since you'd had so much immersion in the anime world, where you're like, oh yeah, this looks like just a neighborhood I'm familiar with.
Yeah, it was definitely the neighborhood I was familiar with. It was just like, I just didn't know what it was like. I just knew I was going to have a good time in Japan regardless of how the show was or how everything was. But everybody in Japan embraced me after I made Melt My Eyes, See Your Future, which had a lot of Japanese references, even to Yusaku Matsuda, which you could pretty much tell me, like, did you grow up watching Yusaku Matsuda by any chance?
No.
Or you never heard Detective Story or anything like that?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so
What's the story?
Okay, you gotta tell us.
okay, I
now.
gotta tell you. Okay, so basically, Yusaku Matsuda was a Japanese actor. His last film was a Ridley Scott film where he played the villain. He died of cancer, and he pretty much, his look and how he was dressed and everything inspired characters like Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop, Akiji from One Piece, and I tell everybody in this interview, and he influenced me on how the way I dress. So like, he was like a major influence when it came down to that album and how I wanted to be portrayed as this like cool dude and shit like that. And then when it came down to just in general, like I started wearing bucket hats because of him, glasses and all this stuff. He was the reason I got into fashion in the first place. And then I started finding stuff I like, and then that's when One Piece came into the picture, and that's when this game called Jet Set Radio Future came into the picture.
All right.
You know? And I was basically like emulating like how I wanted to dress and how, and like what can work in real life.
Okay.
You know?
That's cool.
That's how I ended up getting into like just things, period.
So this is like, is this an instance of remixing? Like, or
Yeah,
when
I
you're
think
combining?
Yeah. I feel like people have a different language, you know, like to use different words for it. I'm curious, Denzel, what you I mean, you describe it as emulating, like that's a way to describe it. I think, that's another feature of Japanese culture, right? It's like we are in this like island country that is like the cycle time for cultural like innovation and trying things out is really fast. But the other thing that Japan has always been really porous to other cultural influences. So like Japanese food, you think of as Japanese food, but tempura is from Portugal. Japanese have curry.
Tempura.
Kareeraisu is like the Indian version of, or the Japanese version of Indian curry. And like Japanese people, I think in the U.S. this idea of cultural like the other term is appropriation is kind of negative, but in Japan like there's this book called Remade in Japan by Joseph Tobin, and it's like always like taking influences, and like there's a huge hip hop scene and a huge reggae scene in Japan, and like there's and I don't know, like I think maybe people have different feelings about it, but like as a Japanese person, like I think that's one of our superpowers is that we appropriate, but hopefully in a way that's like an homage and respectful and not like the bad kind. But if you look at something like Cowboy Bebop or Samurai Champloo, that is like a total sampling of other cultures like jazz and hip hop and westerns and space opera, and just like they like this idea in anime or even Dragon Ball Z, it's like it's based on a Chinese myth.
Journey to the West.
And it's martial arts, but it also has like U.S. superhero vibes sprinkled in, and it's like it's really like and I think maybe that's what. Well, also because it's not live action, it helps people from different backgrounds and cultures see themselves in it, but it also gives people permission to like grab things from other places and make it their own. And I love, like I did a study on anime music video creators, like English language creators, and they take like the songs that they love and then they remix or they edit anime to conform to like the soundtracks that they're English language songs. And I love that because it's like there's this foreign cultural media, but then there's my home culture music, and we're going to put it all together and make something that's really new. And, that feels a lot like what you're describing, and it feels like a good kind of, maybe appropriation isn't the right word, maybe it's sampling, maybe it's remix, whatever you want to call it. It's like the way that we as humans express ourselves is through the voices and language of people who have created things before us, and to honor that seems good or
Have
healthy.
you seen AMVs with your music?
Yeah, I've seen AMVs with my music. Of course, I've seen AMVs with my music. I used to watch AMVs. The first AMV I ever seen was is like they took Naruto and they took this song called Lupe the Killer by Lupe Fiasco and put them together. And that was the first AMV I ever saw. And that was like probably had to be 13 years ago.
And a lot of fans do it with your music?
Not as much nowadays, but like they did back in the day. I remember they did Ricky and they put One Punch Man as like the AMV. But like she said, like stuff like Samurai Champloo and Cowboy Bebop, they do remix, because if you look at Cowboy Bebop, a lot of the stills, a lot of the way they position the camera angles and everything comes from spaghetti westerns, but spaghetti westerns came from this Chanbara films. And Chanbara films is like pretty much like samurai films that you get from Yojimbo, Sanjiro, Seven Samurai, all what's his name?
Kurosawa.
Kurosawa. Thank you.
And so
I got his name right? Kurosawa. Yeah.
So this is all, and is this what you'd call ethnography? Like where you're talking about how different cultural identities emerge and how one influences another and like tracing it back? Is that part of how you do your research?
Yeah. I mean, in the way I do.
Yeah.
But that's how I find out who influenced what.
Yeah, he's an ethnographer too. You're like a cultural anthropologist.
So I guess I am too. Because like Dragon Ball Z, when you mentioned that it came from Chinese, it came from like Chinese culture. Dragon Ball Z did, because it came from this book called Journey to the West. And if you translate the main character name Wukong, which is a Chinese name, and translate it to Japanese, it becomes Goku.
And it's like and then that came on my radar because I like the Thundercat song. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of Dragon Ball.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you got the name.
Yeah.
You know?
So who's this?
Oh, this is Ace. This is Luffy's brother.
And so and that's One Piece?
This is One Piece, yes. R.I.P. Ace.
And so like that's clearly got like a cowboy vibe happening, right?
Yeah, man. I
One-
mean,
yeah.
like you see
One
his whole
Piece is
fit.
like-
This
Yeah.
fit you could pull off in real life.
Not
You
me.
can pull this off in real life. You know what I'm saying? Of course, if you got abs and shit,
Yeah.
but like, you know,
If you airbrush your abs.
nah, not me. I want the real thing. But like a lot of these, a lot of the stuff and a lot of the way people dressing, like, yo, if you got find a belt like this, is shit's tight. But you could, it's just like you look at this as a base, and then you start to remix it, and then you know find things that like what makes sense. You know.
So what's on your chain?
Oh, this is Akuma from Street Fighter.
Oh, okay.
So I picked him like because I was explaining it earlier and everything, but he's just like he has this whole journey of like trying to figure out how to be the best and how to get stronger and perfecting his crafts, even when he got to fight the best people and like pretty much take them out.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
But Matt, you do this too. This podcast is like a cultural contact zone kind of,
All right.
thing. Yeah.
So we all get accredited here.
Yeah, you're remixing.
All right. Well, so then this is, you'd said, well, there are a couple things I want to talk about. One, you talk about how, because it's not live action, people are able to kind of maybe project their own experience and identity onto these characters. And I'm sure as like with a developing mind, that has a big impact. And I wanted to say in my relationship to your music, like you talk about Ricky, or I've heard Walkin', or you did that Rage Against the Machine cover. Like when I was growing up, it was just like you were this or you were this or you were this. But I wonder if, like, and maybe this is just a consequence of growing up in internet culture, like that there aren't those boundaries. Like you're able to just say like, yeah, okay, I'll do this, and they're like, this is kind of like shape-shifting quality to you as a musician.
I mean, when it comes down, I like researching things that's like different. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes down to the stuff I like, the shit I'm into, I'm gonna try to emulate it in my art as best as possible. But when it comes down to like whether if I'm making manga myself and I'm making the music, I keep those two completely separate.
Oh, all right.
Like I don't like mixing. Like it's like, yeah, so you gonna be doing music for this? No, this is his own world. This is his own world. I leave them. The only through line they have with being connected is that I created both of them. You know?
So you're putting out a book.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Briefly.
All right, please.
So, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want somebody to steal my idea.
All right, don't do it.
Like,
Well, or do it in a way that you can protect it.
well, I don't know
Yeah.
because it's like when I talk about it, it's like it just keeps going. Like,
But you're developing like a whole character universe, or is it just one character?
No. It's several different characters, and depending on where you at in your life, you're gonna either be rooting for one, but don't want to root for them, and rooting for another one, but you don't like the person it's connected to.
So are you writing all the dialogue as well, too?
Writing all the dialogue, and then we have a whole team, so it's a whole process. So I kind of got the process from watching the Toys That Made Us and seeing how Ninja Turtles was created,
Right.
how they just made the book first, and then they made the toy, but they realized they couldn't do nothing with the toy if they didn't make a show. Then they made the show and everything. So, yeah.
Okay. And then, so when can we expect that to be in print?
Well, we getting the last volume, like the 4th volume done. And I'm going to put it all together into a graphic novel so everybody sees what's going on, do the cover and everything. And then once it's all put together in there and whatnot, we, manufacture it ourselves and then we sell it independently first.
But you're going to keep it completely separate from
Separate from the music, hell yeah. Like that, the book has nothing to do with what I make as a musician.
Okay. And then the chapter you wrote in the book about AMVs, the music videos, like, so that had a huge part in its spreading like wildfire, yes? And in the way you describe it about like there being the conventions and people like that was how people initially had access to new anime, yeah? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, that's interesting about anime for English-speaking folks or non-Japanese-speaking folks is, the reason why there's a market for anime manga in this country, for example, at all, is because the fans opened it up. American media channels and producers did not think that this was something that American, consumers would be interested in. So in the early years, it was, like expats or, the military kids who went overseas and like recorded stuff and brought stuff back. And then literally at the conventions, you would show up.
That's like 80s, 90s or?
Yeah,
Okay.
80s. And then they started doing conventions where if you wanted to see, or they would mail videos, and then you would go to conventions and they would literally, like the bilingual people would like shout out the translations as you're watching because there was no translation. And then they started like fan subbing VHS. And then when the internet came around, that's when it really exploded. And I did some ethnography with the digital fan sub scene where it was amazing. Like it was all organized over internet relay chat, IRC, which is kind of like Slack. I don't know. Us old timers, we did the internet on IRC. And then, these.
And kids were using that?
It was, I would say mostly like sort of college age, like, a lot of free labor goes into this.
Yeah.
So it's like kids who aren't working are, young people.
Yeah.
And they would, since, there's always a source who would record it in Japan, and then it gets dropped, and then the translator does it, and the timer, the subtitle, they have this whole workflow. And like the next One Piece episode or the next Naruto episode drops, and then the really big groups were subbing these really big series like One Piece and Naruto before they were available on DVD or before they were available certainly on cable. And they would have this workflow where they would have subbers in different time zones so that they could turn around a series within like 24 hours and like the translator. And it was just amazing. And then you release it on BitTorrent. You have to be on the IRC, and then, thousands of downloads, just torrents are just going. And so I was doing research in sort of the height of that digital fan subbing era, but it was because the fan subbers demonstrated that there was a huge appetite for anime in the Western world, that then, more DVDs started being released, and then you started seeing like cable. And by the time Denzel was watching, there was not like a ton of anime, but there was a decent amount being shown on like Toonami. But that, like the Japanese industry, it's never like, it's not an international industry. It's not like Sony or something that was like a global industry. And so it was, when streaming started, it was Crunchyroll trying to like make the case to the Japanese creators for how to license, and then the anime fans, because they want to honor the creators, they're not trying to steal it. So as soon as the industry started doing the licensing and the commercial distribution, a lot of those fan subbers were actually hired into the new commercial industry. But then after the official channels cropped up, the amateur fan subbing scene started to
subside.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
Well, so I would say like around when the book came out, which was 2012, was when you started seeing like, I think there were already obviously big series like Dragon Ball and so on that were starting to be released, but the volume of anime, or fan subbers would have a process where you would only keep the torrents up until the DVD was out. So there was sort of like this idea that we're opening the market, but as soon as the commercial industry takes over, we take down the torrents.
Yeah.
So that was like that transition period. And around like 2012, 15, you start seeing that whole scene go away because the commercial, and then you get like the live streaming and subtitling happening fast enough that you don't need the fan sub scene to fill in, like, because it used to be like years before a series would be released on DVD. And the fans are like, I'm not going to wait,
they just
years.
go on the internet.
Yeah.
And is that how you consumed it?
Nah, it wasn't like that. I was just taking what I could get, because, I didn't like either find it on the internet or we'll just go to Best Buy and stuff like that, me and my brother. And that's how we got pretty much DVDs at the time. Like, you know, that's how I found out who Broly was and everything. And like watching Coolest Revenge and all these movies that was coming out at that time. But majority of them, you know, it was either on the internet or you had to really find it or you had to go on LimeWire, which was a lot of torrents and stuff. And then you had to really deep dive into the internet. To find
but you were going
what
on LimeWire to get it.
Yeah, pretty much. Like my brother was the computer whiz. He was the one finding everything.
Okay.
But in that era, not everybody had like broadband internet. I mean, that's why like college kids had, because they're on campuses and they have like really good internet. So they're the ones who hosted the torrents and did a lot of this stuff. But yeah, it wasn't like now that, you know, you can just pick up your phone and be on the internet. It wasn't like that back then. So.
Well, this is one thing I wanted to ask you is because like now that things are changing so incredibly fast, does that make your job harder?
You mean as to keep up with like,
and to make sense of how
culture,
things spread and because something is, you know, is outdated so much, you know, quicker or...
Well, I think it makes like the actual fans, otaku, who follow all the things, like probably makes Denzel's work harder because there's more, but because a lot of the underlying patterns don't change. Like the content churns really fast, but the platforms might change, but a lot of how you know, like I study digital youth culture basically, and a lot of what kids do, which are like making friends, you know, flirting with each other, you know, all these things, being creative, trying to express their voice, those things don't change. But then you do have to kind of, like when TikTok comes, you say, oh, where does that fit within the ecosystem? You have to analyze all the new platforms and stuff, but then human behavior doesn't change that much.
I don't even know how I do that, man.
Yeah.
Shit,
You're not on TikTok, right?
I am on TikTok, but I'm not.
You don't use it.
Yeah. I don't use it as much as I should, and everybody's like, you should do it for you because you got personality and shit. I'm like,
yeah, if you're an actual creator, you have to keep up. I think for me, I'm just an observer, so I don't have to learn how to do the things. But you know, like TikTok is kind of like it again. It's like it references some of the earlier kinds of more everyday, more amateur media before the internet became big. People used to make videos like that were more like just regular people. So it gets back to something that like YouTube and you know some of these other platforms or Instagram became too shiny and influencer heavy. So TikTok feels more like regular people every day, and I think that was like a niche that had kind of gone away, but it's also just like the form factor, you know, the user experience. It is sort of the penultimate short video platform. And so every era, it takes a while for the internet to kind of nail the platform genre. So like Facebook is sort of the penultimate sort of social network genre. YouTube is like the longer form video, like each, but it took a long time. I mean, there were so many social network sites before Facebook. Yeah. But I think TikTok, the short form video, it's like they got it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so this is something I wanted to ask is we were talking about how like even when you were coming up that this was still a part of nerd culture. But you know, now we're at a time that like nerd culture is in a way kind of the dominant culture. Yeah. So when did that shift happen? Are you able to pinpoint as an anthropologist, say like this is when it was acceptable or celebrated?
I don't know, man. Like, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I don't know when it became accepted. We were just kind of doing it, and then
even before it was accepted.
Before it was accepted, and then you realize there were people that's like, oh wait, it's cool to like this stuff, and then they start being more invested, to a point where it kind of just took over. Yeah, you know, you got people like Megan Thee Stallion, like you know what I'm saying, dressing up like Boa Hancock from One Piece for a music video, and you're just like. It's like somebody that people, you know, look at and be like, she likes that. You know what I'm saying? That's the thing that you don't expect, you know?
So you don't remember a point when it was like, oh wait, this is no longer Outcast. This is...
Man, all I knew was I was making references to anime. Rob Banks was making references to anime, and everybody that was somewhat around our age group, like the '90s babies, we was making references and stuff like that. And then the younger generation under us, or people our age, they understood it. But the people that was older than us didn't get it.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
You missed that.
Yeah,
you missed
so
that.
The ones that was born in like the 80s, like the 80s babies, they did not get it.
Yeah.
Because when they was in high school, like in the early 2000s, that was like, you like that?
And you had to work
Yeah, even
really
we
hard
kind of
at
got a brunt of it when we was in high school until we started like making it like, man, this is what I like.
Yeah, right.
You know? And then one thing I was so if you're gonna be a nerd in the right way. You know what I'm saying? Don't be a nerd in the wrong way.
What's a nerd in the wrong way?
Well, nerd in the wrong way is just like you overdo it. You know what I'm saying? It's like too much. You know what I'm saying?
Like it's not authentic anymore?
Not even authentic. It's just like you overindulge in it. It's
Yeah,
just
I
like
got
if
you.
you're gonna put it somewhere where it actually counts. You know?
So you're talking about, and I've also heard you like talking about, because you came up as part of Raider Clan, a group of rappers in Florida.
Yeah.
So like another thing that I read in your book is that like there's something like democratizing about fan culture and the way that things are exchanged. And I kind of, when I've heard you like mention all these other people that you came up with, it just seemed like there was this really tight knit community.
Oh yeah, it was very tight knit.
Yeah.
Perp put it together, and everybody was finding everybody, like finding the members and like bringing them to them.
And you're bringing each other up.
Yeah, basically that was like the whole thing. And then you got people that was in that group that was in the animators the same way I was. You know what I'm saying? So you had people like Xavier Wolf, for example, like he was super into Bleach, like this anime called Bleach and Ichigo and all of them, and that was like, I think me was him was, and then you had Ki Nayada, who was also into anime as well, the same way I was, you know, because we all grew up watching Toonami and Adult Swim, and it would just come on both of those.
Okay. And so what do you make of like the whole community component to it and things being exchanged so quickly? Like, I mean, I'm assuming that just really takes off once the internet is introduced.
Yeah.
Is there instances of that in a pre-internet world?
Well, that's where, I mean, I think to your question about like when did nerd culture start becoming cool or I still don't like the term mainstream necessarily, but it's like
it's nerd culture.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
you know, otaku culture. But I mean, I think it's like in a parallel, like the internet and digital technology, like peer-to-peer technology, like what you were describing, like communities, peers learning from each other. You've always had that happening locally, right? But suddenly you have it happening globally, where you can have like a 12-year-old who's really into like, I don't know, fire Pokemon or something, find like that community online. And so the ability to do that peer-to-peer learning and in a creation context. So I feel like what you're describing is like we're analog versions of that. Like even anime fandom, like in the VHS era, there were analog versions of like remix culture and these are the sort of genres that I've been analyzing for a long time, because I think they create incredible culture and learning, right? When you have like a peer-to-peer environment of people who are passionate about the same things, pushing each other, and you're releasing your content on a constant basis, getting feedback, releasing content in a community who there's like the whole layer from kids who are just starting out and messing around and maybe just learning to like people who are really good, and then the pros are just it's not binary, like there's amateurs and pros and there's nothing in between within these cultures like anime culture or otaku culture. Like there's just a spectrum from this like really deep base where kids are, and that's kind of how I imagine, some of the hip hop communities might have similarities in that, there's kids who are just hanging out and sharing things and ripping off each other and then getting better. But there's always like a kid or a young person or even an older person who you actually know, who's a little bit better than you. So you're not aspiring to be like the most famous, creator, but you have the kid who's just a little bit better than you, and then you keep step by step. And that's how you get good. You can't jump from here to here.
Yeah,
You gotta
can't go
have
0
a
to
community that's like
That's
lifting
really
you up.
every time,
Well, don't they say that like it's really important for really young kids to not be just sequestered in their age group? Like learning accelerates when you have people older and younger than you.
Yeah,
Is that
and
the same
these
thing?
interest communities, or we call them affinity groups, those, I do a lot of work in education too, and I have a weird philosophy, or a non-mainstream philosophy, that the best kind of learning happens in affinity groups and interest groups that are about something, caring about something like creative work or activism, or whatever it is, whatever a kid is like genuinely, authentically interested in. That's the most powerful context, and it's usually mixed age. And I think what's interesting about, and I find powerful about otaku culture, anime culture, is like it's also cross-cultural. So you're like coming together around a shared interest, and you're vibing with each other, but you're also cutting across cultural boundaries, which I think is really healthy for kids too.
Right.
Yeah. And this is one thing, it strikes me as counterintuitive that you say, because Japan is so small and sort of inward looking, that's why there's such a fast turnover rate, and in contrast, America, which is so huge, moves much slower. I
think it's a tradition thing when it comes down to like America moving slower, because if you think about it, we're like pretty much like slow to everything, and then we get it. Like when I went over to Japan, they just had things that I didn't even think about.
Like what?
Like a hot refrigerator for your tea.
A hot refrigerator for your tea?
Yeah, that's true,
Yes.
right? They have a hot refrigerator for your tea.
Yeah.
The tea is already in a bottle. It's already sweet. It already has lemon in it, and it's good as hell.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's like I felt like I was in outer space. Like underwear vending machines. I'm not making that up. I saw it.
The number of phones. I mean, back in the day, now there's, I guess, in the iPhone era that's changed. But yeah, like the number, variety, like they'll release, like Sony will release 50 different cameras a year in Japan and export like a tiny fraction of those. So it's kind of the laboratory where, at least for Japanese creators and engineers and designers, they experiment in Japan, and then but it's also like it's a single language. It's culturally more homogeneous. The distribution is really tight. And then for like anime-related content, the intensity of the fan engagement, because in contrast to the US, they were pretty loose around copyright. So they let fans remix and create fan fiction and comics, and they've never cracked down on it like the U.S. has. It's not like Disney is like the other extreme, right? So I think Anime Expo or Comic Con is like 100,000 or so people once a year. In Japan, the largest fan convention is the Comiket. Twice a year in Tokyo, 500, about 500,000 people a year. And it's there's some industry representation, but it's only fan comics. 500,000 people a year in a country that size. So the scale of fan production and like the creative fan and remix production is just huge. So it's like, and then sometimes creators come up through that, or a lot of creators come up through that fan culture to become professional creators.
Right.
So we're about out of time. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk with one another about? Questions?
Can you elaborate on Kaizen for just like the viewers out there? Like, this is like a philosophy I think you guys developed in Japan.
Oh, you should tell me what it means to you, because
I mean, I got it tatted, so I.
Really?
Yeah, I got it tatted on this arm right here.
Oh my God!
I have Kaizen tatted.
Wow.
So I got it from like Japanese philosophy, and I think you guys use it in business, and and it just means good change. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think that's pretty I think that's pretty accurate. You're sort of a deep observer of Japanese culture, but yeah, I didn't realize it was a term that got exported that much. But yeah, it's like change, innovation. Yeah.
Right. Can you elaborate on how, like, how the term was developed in Japan?
I wish I could, but I don't have that.
Well, in what
knowledge.
instances is it used?
I think it comes from the business world, right? Primarily. So
Right.
when there's sort of a effort for kind of new, I don't know, I guess in here you would call it like change management or something like that. I don't know what the equivalent U.S. English term would be, but
Well, when I found out about the term, I was watching these like little YouTube documentaries
Yeah.
on like, and they had one on a UFC fighter, and they just said he follows Kaizen, and I was like, what the hell is Kaizen? Then they explained it, and then they was talking about like Japan, and like it means like it's two words and it's good and change and stuff like that. That's why I asked you,
yeah.
just to talk to the viewer about what was going on or tell him what was going on, because I got it tatted on my skin just because I could just remind myself, like, one small step leads to a bigger change later on,
Yeah. See, you said it better than me. This is like a great example of how culture evolves and improves and gets more sophisticated through the cross-cultural context. So I learned something.
So this was an American UFC fighter?
Nah, this is Volkanovski. I was watching a documentary on him.
Who's that?
Alexander Volkanovski. He's a UFC fighter from Australia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But somebody else did the doc on him, but
Yeah.
they was explaining it. Like how he got better in each fight, and just like little small improvements made him like the champion. He's no longer the champion now, but when he was first starting in the UFC to where he became champion.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's a great example of like, I feel like even like Japanese culture gets better when it's taken up by other people and it gets like more meaningful. So that's a term I've heard of, but I've never really, thought
As a
too
Japanese
deeply
person,
about.
it doesn't have the same context.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the other thing that's interesting about Japanese culture is I think I don't know, there's bad parts about it, but we're always really curious about what other people think about us and how those meetings, and we reverse import things. So like, we California rolls. Teppanyaki, you think of it as a Japanese thing, but it was actually created in the U.S. Like benihana.
Yeah.
Steve Aoki's dad.
Yeah, so that was...
You know that?
Yeah, I know.
That was a American creation, but now we have we've reverse imported like California style sushi and teppanyaki. So maybe we'll reverse import a version of Kaizen that has been made
better.
better.
I got it from y'all.
Yeah, but that's
the whole point, yeah.
That's the give and take. I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's so I feel like culture is improved by that exchange.
And so the one thing I want to ask you is, so like I understand that anthropology, it's a lot about listening, with a foundation of scientific curiosity. But at what point do you start making coming up with theories? Or, you'd mentioned that you have a philosophy about affinity cultures. So like when you come up with theories, how does that work?
Yeah, so I think you just keep testing the theory through more case studies and observations. So this conversation was really informative to me because I'm sort of saying, oh, well, some of my theories about, how there's certain patterns around, how young people make meaning of it and how that kind of language around anime can support the learning of a super creative person. That's like, it's another example that reinforces my theory that like it's healthy and good for kids to be exposed to these much more complex narratives at a young age and to have the opportunity to be in a creative community where you're testing that and expressing yourself. Like, I feel like Denzel's like a really great success story of like how anime culture can kind of support creative vision and motivation. But it's also like a really unique context, because when I was doing my research, it was like the fandom, I don't think, was integrated with hip hop culture at all, or not. There were some creators that I encountered in the scene who were doing remix with hip hop culture, but they were, it was a very small minority. It was still like an overwhelmingly white and Asian scene. And so learning about that evolution in your community was something I didn't really know about, or I didn't. So that was like, oh, it's so interesting, because I wouldn't have predicted that based on my theory, right? Because when I was doing the research, it was like there was sort of a cultural bias in a different direction. So I feel like folks like Denzel taking it up and kind of being out and open about being an anime fan has changed the culture in a really positive way. So that's cool, and that's changed my theory. My pattern has become more complex. My theory has become more complex, more complete.
Right on. Well, thank you both so much, and this is really cool. And thank you to Anime Station for having us. Awesome.
Thanks. It's a lot of fun.
Be sure to check out Denzel's new album, King of the Mischievous South Volume 2. And you can catch him on his nationwide arena tour this fall. For more information, please visit denzelcurry.com. And to stay up to date with Mimi, you can go to her lab's website, of which she is director, connectedlearning.uci.edu. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram. Social media manager is Bailey Constas, digital producer is Keenan Cush, and location camera was by Alex Waxenbaum and JJ House. Special thanks to Bradley and Nick at Orienteer and Anime Station for helping make today's episode possible. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review and tell a friend about the show on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, go to singforscience.org and follow us on social media at Sing for Science. Thanks for listening.